Well, welcome all back to the second session of today. We will be slowly starting with basically the second session, which will be moderated by Dominic Stead, professor at Aalto University, School of Engineering, Department of Built Environment. And I will hand out to Dominic to proceed with the session. We already have one offline participant here. If you may show the... Oh, can you sit? Can you sit? Yeah, so our offline participant, and we will have online participants on the screens. So I think I will just hand out to you, Dominic, and you may start the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oleksandr, and welcome everyone, both online participants and on-site participants, to this second session, which we've entitled Planning Tools and Learning from Case Studies. So as you see from the program, we have a session which is just under 2 hours in length, 1 hour 45 minutes. My proposal is that presentations should be limited to around 20 minutes maximum to give us enough time for discussion and questions after that, if that is acceptable to everyone. We have 3 speakers on the program today. You will have hopefully received the program, and I will go in turn to those speakers. So we start with Oleksandr Golubtsov, followed by Nataliya Makarova, and followed by a presentation from Kercuku. Excuse me for my bad pronunciation. Hopefully you can correct me when it's your turn. But welcome to all our speakers, welcome to the audience. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to the first speaker, who is Oleksandr Golubtsov. Please introduce yourself, say something about where you're from, and then proceed with your presentation. The floor is yours.
Дякую, доброго дня всім. Дуже дякую, пане Stead.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Stead. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers for this excellent event, symposium, and for giving me an opportunity to present the result of our work, to share them with a broad professional community. I am a senior research officer at the National Academy of Sciences Institute of Geography and a guest researcher at the Dresden Technical University Department of Landscape Planning. So I'm a specialist in landscaping, and the instrument, which landscape instrument will be discussed today, and its applications to environmentally oriented spatial planning of communities in Ukraine. So, as you know, landscape planning in Ukraine is quite a common tool in Germany. And in Germany, it is listed as one of the key tools to promote ecological normatives, and it is listed in the federal law on environmental protection, and so it is applied and adapted to various levels, including the regional level down to the local level. So there are 4 levels of this kind of planning in Ukraine. Previously, we had a range of research papers which rather distantly, but resembled landscape planning, and they focused on the analysis of the landscape, on the social economic situation, and then the conclusion of such research was to give recommendations for the territorial development. These were research papers, I would like to emphasize once again, and only sporadically they would be integrated into the real-life development of specific territories. In terms of landscape planning and urban planning at various levels, the aspects of territorial research were the part of the investigation stage, and then the aspects of the territorial functioning and territorial features were researched at this stage. Starting from 2012, National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, its Institute of Geography, in collaboration with Dresden and with Berlin, performed a range of research projects to integrate landscape planning into the urban planning and development in Ukraine. And there were specific aspects of this instrument that were applied at different hierarchical levels. In particular, in Cherkasy, and these attempts follow the logic of German landscape planning, that is, they resulted in 3 documents designed for 3 levels of territorial division of Ukraine. And so we have designed a comprehensive plan for Cherkasy region. Then excuse me, please, it's not a comprehensive plan, it was a landscape program. Then the strategic goals were detailed in the framework, landscape plan, and further on they were detailed in landscape plan, which reiterated the goals and the objectives at a higher level, and at the lower level, specifically in Stepanovska amalgamated territorial community, landscape planning as a tool to study and landscape and to design specific recommendations concerning its development brings together all the aspects of landscape research and normative documents, and this tool was implemented as the comprehensive plan for the spatial development of the community territory. Landscape planning is part of this plan, and it's an integral part of this plan.
Комплексного плану. Мушу тут сказати, що
here I would like to say that presently landscape planning follows the methodological approaches of Germany, because we are using the results of the pilot projects that were conducted, and here we got very valuable contribution from our German colleagues, and we have been collaborating with them for 10 years already, so that we could acquire this methodology and adapt it to the situation of Ukraine. There are traditions which I have already tried to spread in my Institute of Geography, National Academy of Sciences, which envisage a special approach to this conceptual scheme, envisaging again the zoning of the territory, which we have acquired from the German experience, and the content and the logic of our landscape planning mimics those of Germany. Here you can see the points, the tasks of the sectional landscape planning in the comprehensive plans. And further on, I would like to present a few examples, study cases, how we have conducted research and used this tool in specific communities. Before we start with that, I would like to give an overview of the methodology, how we structure our process of research and information analysis, and how we design this conceptual plan and then the landscape planning scheme. So here on the slide, you can see how we are identifying the key issues, valuable, negative impacts, development goals, measures needed. So these are the key issues, and they are interrelated. And in this way, they specify the key issues again, and then they are translated into tasks for solving problematic issues, and then they are translated into work steps. So if we analyze this structure with the landscape planning section, these are the blocks which follow the relevant parts of the resolution mentioned above. So as part of the comprehensive plan, we start with the analysis of the natural conditions of the landscape, of identifying the conflicts and risks on the territory of the community, and priorities which we need to take into account to design an adequate landscape plan. Next stage is drafting the landscape plan as a map of the specific scale which must match the requirements to planning documentation. And so the product of the stage is a map of priorities, things we need to preserve, things we need to develop, potential or restoration or improvement if specific challenges are identified and require resolution. And the final stage is the integration, that is the alignment of project solutions with the ecological requirements of the landscape plan, so that the solutions designed by the planners and architects will match the ecological environmental situation of the community. And here are a few cases of the application of this landscape tool, planning tool to specific communities. Here I would like to start with Chernivtsi City Territorial Community, which is now the object of landscape planning. And according to the law, this landscape plan was designed for that. Chernivtsi Hromada is rather complex in terms of the landscape and in terms of urbanization of the territory. At the same time, it has big areas which are undeveloped, green zones, which need to be preserved. And here we have a framework document for the planning process, which is the concept of integrated development of the Chernivtsi city, because most of the territory is taken by the city itself, and the provisions of the strategy are designed and further developed in the landscape planning, including support to minor rivers and rivulets, development of green zones, support to the climate comfort, and preservation of specific landscape zones. Here, as soon as we have a look at the territory itself, according to the framework document which I have mentioned above, we have pinpointed the key issues to be addressed. These key issues are the outcomes of both natural situation of the community. On the other hand, there are also drivers which are connected to the built environment and the territorial development by the population. So the natural conditions include the Prut River, and these areas that it floods, and you can see it on the map. And on this map, you can see natural landscape complexes, zones, which are the results of natural factors. Here, they are important because the river has quite a lot of flooding areas, and they are important to preserve the sustainability of the landscape itself. So here the key conflict results from the intentions to build on these flooded areas, and then this will definitely result in challenges connected with flooding of the built environment and other issues. And our plan has looked into it, and then the landscape plan that we have provided was aligned with the suggestions for the development. So if the development were allowed, then the development had to provide for drainage, for water drainage from territories that were situated on the higher areas. Also, we mapped minor rivers on the territory. Why so? Because it was very important to support such minor rivers and rivulets. These are the ones that provide recreational potential and ensure sustainability of the landscape. Moreover, we have mapped the basins of those rivulets. Why so? Because according to the Code of Ukraine, it is forbidden to use rivulet basins for any kind of economic activities. And it is not about protective areas, it's about natural zoning, as it is done, as it is spelled out in the Water Code of Ukraine. So for us, it was very important to map these big landscape complexes to prevent any conflict with the developers who would like to build on these territories. And we had to discuss it with the planners to ensure that ecological requirements are met. And also we have mapped the cityscape itself, and here we also tried to take into account the climate change. We have analyzed how the surface is heated, whether there are overheated zones, whether there are spaces on the territory of the community which are vacant, which could be a potential to design green zones and inside the city. And we have also discovered what natural preserves are present on the territory of the community where development is forbidden.
Another point is the Emerald Network territories that are important in the context of Ukraine's European integration, because this Emerald Network is considered to be as a prospective network to be included into the all-European network. And these territories are in line with the current national parks. However, it's not always the case. So it's also important to take into account these natural reserves, that environmentally protected territories that are there. So these are the results that we analyzed and presented in the landscape plan to demonstrate the priority areas, to demonstrate the priority goals, and to demonstrate the possible areas of development of these territories. So here we can see that in dark green are fragments of national park that need protection. In green, you can see the green or free spaces that can be used within the city to develop its recreational potential. And then outside of the construction territories that are also necessary for the various city landscapes to avoid water erosion that is active in this territory. Another important point, looking at Novoborivska community in Zhytomyr region, this is the support of biodiversity through introducing the natural protection instruments and instruments that would create environmental protection fund. So in this community is located in the northern part of Ukraine, and that's why it is different from other territories of Ukraine. There are a lot of forests there, a lot of water, a lot of small rivers, and other objects. But anyway, for this territory, it is characteristic to see a very low percent of natural protected territories, natural reserves. And Ukraine has established indicators when it relates to environmentally protected territories. And since the population of this territory is not very dense, there is potential to expand the natural preserves. We analyze the structure of the villages in the territory of community, and then identify how valuable the biotopes are when it comes to support of biodiversity, and how in line they are with the European lists that state what's important to be, what needs to be protected. And this is how we identify these territories that should be protected and integrated these territories into the landscape plan. Here you have these red dots. These are the territories where the ores are being extracted, and this is where actually magnesium ores are being extracted. So these parts are being exploited to extract them. When it comes to the land use, I will demonstrate another example of Rohan community in Kharkiv region. Here we had several challenges on our way of developing this territory. They are related to land use. Why? Land resources and overall agricultural sector in the steppe and forest and steppe territories of Ukraine, in the central and southern part of Ukraine, are very important for the development of the community. Basically, this is one of the key factors, or maybe the most important factor that supports these community and supports them economically. Anyway, Ukraine is facing the situation when these lands, because they are very fertile, they are overly used, and the percentage of overuse of these territories are up to 90%. This is one of the challenges. And so soil plowing percentage, the soil plowing percentage is very high, and the degradation of these soils is also very high. Also, the territories in the east and south of Ukraine faced severe consequences because of hostilities. And you can see that on the right, you can see these bright yellow and red dots. Those are the places that suffered from intense artillery shelling and are currently characterized as damaged because a lot of craters have been formed. These data have been analyzed with our colleagues from civil society organizations that analyzes forest protection. So to optimize the structure of lands, these results of analysis were also integrated into the landscape plan in the following way. For those territories that are located on the slopes over 7 degrees, the recommendations say that these parts have to be taken away from active agricultural use and have to be used to create new forests or grass. We also have to pay attention to the fact that landscape planning helps us identify what to do with the territories, because looking at the baseline landscape condition, we can see that we have the forest territories and the steppe territories that are combined in these territories. And so the way we move forward in the future should take into account these specifics. Also, the law of Ukraine on protection of territories says that agricultural lands that are on the slopes over 7 degrees have to be taken out from intensive agricultural use. So this is the legislative condition. For the agricultural lands...
Could you reach a conclusion now, please? We're reaching the end of the time available.
Yes, just 3 more minutes. So here we applied the legislative conditions to process these data to work on the issue that I mentioned, and we also took into account the rivers that are there. And finally, I would like to say that the landscape plan proved to be a successful and effective tool as part of the comprehensive plans, and the parallel development of landscape plan and complex plan and other solutions. This is an effective way to move forward, and the planners accept these environmental conditions that are being developed as part of this effort, and they can be further used and successfully implemented for spatial planning in Ukraine, at least at the community level. Thank you for your attention. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much. And that gives us some time now to give our responses from the people who have been reading your paper. And then we also have some general time available from the members of the audience if they have any questions. So I would like to hand over first of all to the members of the second session who have taken a look at your manuscript, and invite them to give some brief comments first of all on their opinions on your paper. So who would like to go first? Who can I give the floor to first of all?
Dominic, can I begin perhaps?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to present first of all Maria, who is my co-presentator and main coordinator of our project and our part. She is also online, and perhaps she would have some comments as an expert, but to you, Oleksandr, thank you very much for this huge work, not in one region, but in 3. And I would like to ask you, you mentioned in the some first slides this process from the conceptualization ending with implementation. And I would like to ask you, what are the challenges by implementing to your mind in very different regions of Ukraine? Thank you very much.
Дякую вам за такі
Thank you.
коментарі.
Thanks a lot for your comments. Thank you for familiarizing yourself with my work. And when it comes to the challenges, well, some of the challenges is that the environmental recommendations or recommendations related to nature can be immediately accepted by the stakeholders, by local stakeholders. Why? Because when we talk about taking some part of the land out of the agricultural use or other recommendations related to this anthropocentric development of the territories, the stakeholders and the owners or the investors who would like to invest in certain areas, in certain economic capabilities, they are not very positive about it. From the other perspective, the substantiation of the goals and measures within the landscape plan that are tied to the legislative environmental requirements, they work. When they are tied to legislative requirements, they usually work 100%. So when certain measure is in line with the legislative requirement, as we talked about the rivers that I mentioned, the planners and stakeholders are ready to accept this recommendation as it is based on the legislation requirements. So the conclusion is the more specific the requirements are to preserve the landscape or nature in the law, so the more specific they are, the faster they will be implemented through the spatial planning instrument and landscape planning instruments, because this way we can substantiate our decisions or measures more specifically and explain why we need to take these measures. And I also would like to share an example from one of the communities. When the landscape plan was developed, and later at the stage of the integration with the current plan, so these are two parallel processes basically, because this is the work is very similar. So when the landscape plan was developed, we in parallel communicated and worked together with those who with the planners, and we coincided the project solutions and how they are in line with the environmental requirements. And if we saw that there is a crucial conflict related to the legislative requirements, they worked more on these solutions and found another area to work in these objects. For example, certain agricultural objects that were close to these rivers were taken out of the use, or the solutions related to the intensive use of the territories that are part of the Emerald Network, they were also adapted, so stuff like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response, and also for your questions, Natalia. As you mentioned, and which I forgot to say at the beginning, there are a number of people involved in the second paper, including Maria Molearo Dale, and she's also online, so I would like to give her the opportunity to respond to the paper that was just presented and maybe pose some questions if she has them.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you, Alexander, for your presentation. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, great. So greetings from Hamburg, from the HafenCity University. And thank you for your presentation. Very interesting, the coverage also of the work and the research you have been doing. Maybe my question goes in the direction of a ongoing struggle that we are having during our project, and it's how are you dealing in this case with, let's say, calibrating the extent of these planning measures and strategies in contrast to the rapid changing landscape and environment that we are having in Ukraine, when we have to, for example, assess damage coverage that is constantly changing. Do you have any process during your research work and the adaptation of this instrument for aiding cities on how often and from where can you relate to, let's say, updating constantly the damage coverage for adapting again these plans for the cities? Because this is something that we are dealing with in our project at the moment. I wanted to check if you have reflections on this topic. Thank you.
Дякую, Марія.
Thank you, Maria.
Тут дуже яскравий приклад.
Well, a very vivid example is the Rohan community and some other communities that we worked on. And why do I say a vivid example? Because the work to create and produce these comprehensive landscape plans, the work started back in 2021 on these plans, or maybe 2021. So before the large-scale invasion, this is where we first started working on the plans. After that, the result of our work and basically the documents that we created had to be reformulated again. We had to work on them again because of the conditions and circumstances that the territories faced after the hostilities, after the occupation and other related issues. So basically both the comprehensive plan, the plan of the project, and the spatial development plan and the landscape plan were clarified, and we worked on them more. And if we looked at the landscape plan, this part on identifying the damaged land, this part happened after as we revised our plan. And the work process looks like that. We use spatial imaging, high quality spatial imaging, and these images identified all the damages at the territory of the community. So based on the density of the shelling, the zoning of the territory was carried out. So these territories that we were able to restore quickly, that didn't have many craters, or there were very few craters, so those are the territories that were easy to renew. And then there were territories with high density of shelling that faced mechanical damage, chemical pollution, and other harm. So these were the territories. We identified these territories. We showed these territories in the landscape plan as those territories that suffered damages. And in the project plan, we accepted this as the limitation for the economic use. So the first priority was the restoration. And after that, using these territories again in the agricultural use or repurposing them for other types of usage. But in that specific case for Rohan community, these damaged territories were used as limited for agricultural use. So limitations for the cultural use, and this was accepted at the level of the plan. There are very few examples of how to work with these territories because the comprehensive plans that I took part in, I only took part in the Kharkiv territory. We also worked with Ocheretynska community in the Donetsk region, and we started working on this community also before the war, but during the process of our work, we did develop the landscape plan, we did develop the project plan, and we applied similar approaches. We analyzed the damage, but unfortunately these territories are occupied right now, so we cannot take, unfortunately, any further measures.
Thank you. As you might have noticed, we are already approaching the time limit for each of the speakers, but I would like to give Agim the opportunity to ask questions or give some brief comments. Please tell me how I should pronounce your surname, by the way.
No worries at all. Thank you for the presentation. I'm Agim Kercuku. It's a very difficult surname, so you are excused totally about the mistake. Thank you for the presentation, and I have really enjoyed hearing you and reading your paper. I was curious to understand better. I know that there are, of course, a lot of problems and a lot of challenges right now, but what is the grade of participatory involvement of the community in this process that you have explored us? Can you describe us better, maybe how how the community in this context has been somehow involved, even in this problematic moment where there is like the war and there is an invasion going on, and how you can somehow manage to mitigate or adapt to the condition and to somehow allow a more participatory process in this planning decision. Thank you.
Дякую за запитання. Це дійсно дуже важливо.
Thank you very much for your question. Really, this is an important one. How to engage local authorities, stakeholders, local public into planning, and the procedure of participation is listed in the relevant regulations. So even if the planners would like to avoid participation, they cannot. It is mandatory by law. So presently, I would say that we are using a lot of online tools to great effect. We are conducting conferences, open conferences. Everyone who registers is welcome to come and ask questions. These are public hearings. For instance, in Rohan and in Pisochin, Hromadas, we were using this tool quite a lot, and we got a great representation of local residents, and they ask questions, propose things, and the results, the project, the documentation are published, and they are open access, so everyone can make a comment during the public hearings. And we have got proposals to this documentation. And talking about the landscape plan, NGOs put forward suggestions about natural preserves, and the community now is considering those proposals, whether to accept them and to what extent. Despite the war, despite the difficult situation, we are maintaining this participation process, and we are using relevant tools to ensure that everyone interested can take part. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I can also imagine that there might be some questions in Lviv from the audience, but I would say that for the sake of time, we should keep them until the end and see if we have time to cover them then, because otherwise we don't give enough time for the other two speakers. So thank you once again for that first presentation. We should now move to the second one. That second one, as I understand it, will be a shared presentation between two of the contributors to this paper. There are several contributors actually, but two of them will give the presentation. So as I understand, there will be partially online and partially physical presentation. If I could request you to use around 20 minutes, a maximum of 20 minutes for the presentation in total, that would be really helpful. So over to the next presenters, Maria or Nataliya, who is going first?
Thank you, Dominic, for presentation and for time for us. So I would begin with the introduction of our co-sharing team today. So I am Nataliya Makarova, coming from Hamburg, from the HafenCity University, and we would like to present today our project, which is called Arthur Together with Maria. And Maria, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nataliya. Can you all hear me well? Yes, I think it worked last time. So my name is Maria Moleiro. I am a research associate at the Digital City Science Chair in the HafenCity University. And what we are showing you today is an implementation case of a project that we have been carrying out with the GIZ in cooperation with the GIZ to support Ukrainian cities. So this is an ongoing case, actually, the paper that we wrote. Yes, and I would say Natalia would then begin with the first part of the presentation. I present a bit in the middle of it, and then she closes again, so we can pass back the microphone to Natalia. Thank you.
Yes, as you see on the screen, we would like to speak today about our preliminary results and lessons learned from the Aalto project with the topic of rapid recovery, dealing with urban resilience, building in the context of the Ukraine war. Okay, I got it. I would begin with some conceptual remarks which are important in context of the rapid recovery and resilience building in Ukrainian cities. Some of the challenges for the planning we discussed already yesterday in our panels. Concerning urban resilience concepts, there is a still significant research gap, not only in the adoption, but also in how resilience assessment can be effectively integrated into operational planning. This necessity is intensified in context undergoing conflict, where additional factors within the conflict come into play and the need for rapid recovery grows. So we aimed in this project to explain the proposed framework and to pilot it in 2 cities, Kryvyi Rih and Nikopol, based on digital, interactive and replicable approaches. I would speak here about the federated framework, and it composes of different perspectives and approaches from established urban resilience frameworks, which are listed in the slide. The federation aims to acknowledge the multidimensional and diverse conception of cities, to categorize and to organize the topics to be assessed, and to set the goals for further development. The different approaches to urban resilience are each of the reviewed frameworks lack consensus in the categorization of the components of urban systems, for example, in cities. Thus, an integrative approach allows to unify the assessment of urban resilience by compiling a joint set of the indicators to guide and inform the assessment process through the establishment measures. Such integrative categorization is brought up by acknowledging the long-term goal and relevance for all urban settings. So, Aalto project, which stands for Approaches Towards Urban Resilience in Ukraine, aims to provide to cities a methodological approach and practical instruments for the enhancement of urban resilience in Ukraine. Our approach is based on digital interactive tools and spatial data that are replicable and modifiable. So the specific goal concerning the city's involvement and support relies on assessing urban resilience in a measurable manner, supporting strategic planning of projects, key infrastructure and implementation, developing human capacity by facilitating horizontal learning between cities, training personnel and connecting relevant knowledge resources in respect to the new tools and approaches. support in the monitoring of further planning and projects under the urban resilience perspective for a holistic and coherent urban development. I would hand in to Maria.
Thank you, Natalia. Yes, so now I will explain to you a bit how this operational toolbox has been conceptualized up to now, and it's been tested. As you see in the image here, we have drafted a method that consists of 4 big steps, which are compiled in itself also in a first phase of diagnosis of the case of the city, and then a second phase of acting and prioritizing measures. And I will explain each of them in a bit of more detail, but important to mention from our toolbox is what we are trying to tackle here is to design something that can be adaptable enough to be tailored for each city, as we know that each city in Ukraine is facing different threats, different challenges, and different speeds of recovery, but also to prepare a toolbox that can be in some way standardized into let's say a system of work that we can replicate in a similar manner. Next, please. So the first step in this diagnosis is we perform a mapping of challenges. This we do based on a GIS platform. And for us, an important consideration in the project is that we feel that resilience frameworks need to incorporate also this aspect of spatial analysis. And therefore, we're focusing on mapping these challenges in locations of the cities, of the urban context, as we understand how this is intrinsically linked. Let's say the vulnerability of cities and their exposure is necessarily linked to the topic of spatial analysis. So this is what we do in the first phase. Next, please. Once more. Next. For this, we are carrying out this pilot, as Natalia was mentioning, in 2 locations, in Kryvyi Rih and in Nikopol. These are our 2 cities, our 2 test beds for this pilot of this project. And despite the 2 cities being very close to each other geographically, and for example, also both of them having the challenge of being very close to the front line, we have understood up to now in the pilot that both cities have completely different, let's say, context in terms of their scale, in terms of their challenges, and let's say what they are facing as priorities. So this gives us the opportunity to test the case of our tour in 2 different outcomes and 2 different cases. Next, please. So what we do in this first step of our toolbox, our methodology is first, we are basing our studies very much on open data, what we can find currently as open access information, and we have mapped this, and then we go through a series of steps with our city representatives, our local stakeholders, and we discuss with them whether we are mapping the right types of challenges, whether we have any kind of inaccurate information, and then we support further our work with any additional data that we can collect from the cities. And this we, let's say, bring closer into our framework, and we start focusing on specific dimensions of our framework, which has, of course, a broader scope, but we need to focus it and scope it down to a specific case for the city. Next. What you will see here is a video of an example of how our toolbox works in this first step. This is the GIS-based platform of our tour that we have developed. It lets us explore different cities. In this case, we focus, for example, here in Nikopol, in Kryvyi Rih, and we can explore in a spatial manner the data that we can find from this city related to challenges. For example, here we can identify the location of shelters. We can also identify the attributes that these shelters have, for example, how many people they hold. And we can overlay this information with data, for example, of population density and how it is distributed over the city. And this overlay of information lets us understand, for example, the importance of knowing how much population is vulnerable at this point in the city by, for example, not being able to reach a shelter in time. Next, please. The second step of the diagnosis in the methodology is focused on matching now these identified challenges to the indicators that we have in our framework. Next. And this is, let's say, a next part of the instruments that we hold in our tour. We have designed our indicators that are distributed in 4 dimensions: social, institutional, economic, and physical, which are natural and built environment, in a way that we can consult them, let's say, in a more interactive manner, so that this can be an instrument also consulted by other stakeholders. And in this way, we can start exploring which are indicators that could be useful to measure what is performing poorly in relation to the challenges that we have identified. And this can then be brought back to the map, having them here on the list on the right side panel, and starting to explore more what are the necessary measures. Next. To have a bit of an overview of this federated list of aspects that we have brought into our framework from the other frameworks we have explored. These are broken down into our 4 urban dimensions, as I was mentioning: economic, institutional, physical, or social dimensions. And from there, we have subcategories about the urban environment, and then we have an overall list of indicators that we can explore. Of course, not all of them, we explore them in every case. It'll be specific to the case of each city, depending on these collaborative works with the city stakeholders. Next. To give a brief example, how do we do this? For example, the discussions with the cities, we go deeper into the topics, what type of challenge they would have. In one case, it could be water supply problems because of the damage due to the war. And we can go deeper into the characteristics of these challenges. What is exactly the issue with the water supply problems? And we start also verifying how much of this can be matched to the spatial data that we have, whether there is availability. And then this we match to our Arthur indicators framework. And then we see, for example, in this case, the social aspects of our framework are relevant to address this problem. And we can check, for example, access to safe drinking water, what kind of questions we would ask, and how we can verify this with the data. Next. The synthesis of up to now, for example, in the case of our 2 cities, have started to give a highlight on realizing that maybe problems that are similar to both cities actually have in their background different correlations to other aspects that are relevant also for the city, other, let's say, interdependent challenges that are raising because of the original impact. Some of them can have more social consequences. Some of them can maybe have, in the other case of the other city, economic, let's say, background consequences that are relevant to address. Next. When we check now in our 3rd step of the Arthur framework, we focus on now defining with the city actors what are our priority areas of action. How do we now bring these challenges into a specific number of indicators that we can measure? Next. And here you see an image of how, when we focus in more detail into these problems and their effects and their impacts, how we can also start highlighting that there is, in effect, actual correlations and interdependencies from one problem that can generate another. For example, there could be an industrial accident due to the, let's say, attacks in the city, which can, in effect, also overburden the emergency operators in the city. So this can also affect other dimensions of the urban system. And this is what we're trying to highlight with the Arthur framework, that we can, let's say, enhance an easier visualization for the local experts and the local authorities to know what are actually the areas of action they also have to focus on when just looking at one side of the problem. Next. The final step is finally bringing this, highlighting what are the urban resilience capacities in this city that are actually in need of more attention to draft strategy measures for them. Next. Yes. So what you see in this video is one of the 3rd instruments that are inside our toolbox. It's in the form of a Sankey diagram, which actually connects the indicators that we have explored both to the urban dimensions that the city, let's say, has as challenging aspects, to also their vulnerabilities. So we can then here trace back from which measures that we have been analyzing, which resilience capacities need more attention. For example, is city performing with metrics of these indicators poorly in topics like vulnerability, let's say transparency, or robustness? Does it need to cover some of these aspects? And then how do we help them to support in the drafting of more specific action measures for their, let's say, upcoming plans? Next. Finally, what we expect as an envisioned outcome of this project is to be able to assemble from this toolbox a series of knowledge transfer components that can then stay with the cities when we transfer this toolbox to be used further after the end of our project time. And we envision these as a set of components, such as let's say an overview handbook of how to use this type of toolbox. That would be for city actors, for the authorities at a local level. Then also an operation manual that can explain for administrators how to update constantly the data into the system. The indicators manual would be more for local stakeholders, for example, urban planning experts that can help in the drafting of the strategies that are needed once the problems have been prioritized. And finally, a recommendations report that we expect to draft at the end of our project and to have as a first test out of these two pilots. Now I'll pass back to Nataliya for the discussions and conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, so we saw now that we address the translation of the conceptual work into practical operational spatial planning in Ukrainian cities to build resilience. You have seen on the figure showed by Maria how interwoven and interdependent are the physical, economic, institutional, and social dimensions on the level of each city and implementation concerning resilience capacities. And here I would show you an example of how it can function on the level of management. So on the left side, you see the understanding of practical significance and in which specific parameters Ukrainian experts see the possibility of strengthening the capacities of their cities, and of this is like decentralization, diversification and alternativity, multifunctionality and accessibility and community cohesion. And when we compared it to the outer experience and framework, which you see on the right side of the slide, similar capacities are being considered the most relevant for a resilient system. Nevertheless, the difference in terminologies for this and other topics remains also a challenge of the transfer of knowledge and the standardization of implementation measures. So, to conclude, we have seen how important is it to develop digital and replicable and modifiable tools building resilience. The formulation of a resilience-based framework requires the implementation of strategic measures, integrative actions and collaborative assessment among the relevant stakeholders. Effective governance entails the inclusion of all relevant stakeholders and representatives from vulnerable groups in the decision-making process, thereby ensuring the incorporation of diverse perspectives. We will transfer the knowledge to outcome of this research into operational activities over the longer term and should learn from each other continuously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you both for keeping to time. We do have now some time available for comments and questions, and I would like to first of all invite Agim to give some of his thoughts on this presentation and the paper.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you both for the presentation. It was very interesting. And while you were talking about this possibility to modify and adapt, even in the time, the project and the solution that you have introduced, I thought this was very interesting and intriguing in your work. But I have a concern and I have a doubt, because also we are, as you will see later in our work, we are dealing with this dimension of uncertainty in this condition. So this dimension of uncertainty in the level of the data, and how you deal with this aspect of limits of the data inside this toolbox that you are providing, and this kind of theory of knowledge, and how you deal with this dimension of the fact that the data in the context of Ukraine has this kind of very wide, uncertain vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Agim. Maybe if Natalia, if you don't mind, I can maybe start with this question, and I can explain that actually the uncertainty, or let's say the lack of availability of the up-to-date data, is the current struggle of our project. What you have seen today as a presentation is a development that has involved the research, let's say the part of the fundamental research on the topic of resilience, plus the development and implementation of this in just 11 months of a project, which is very intense. And we are at the moment in this, let's say, very important bottleneck of how to really test with the pilots whether this can be validated enough. And as we mentioned at some point in the presentation, we have relied a lot on what we have found as open data. We have to say that there is a great deal of relatively up-to-date open data about Ukrainian cities raised by many platforms, United Nations and others, and World Bank. And from that, we have worked a lot with. At the moment, we are now working with the cities, and they have provided availability from their local geoportals that they have also been developing with the effort of the centralized government, and how they are, let's say, and also with the GIZ, actually, they have developed this. But there is a limitation to how much we will be able to measure in relation to resilience capacities, and it is specifically limited to which data we will get access to. So the idea from this is that we can design this framework as holistic as possible, and then in terms of implementing it actually and bringing it to operation, it will always depend on the data that we can get a hold on from each city. So this is the current state of the project. We are now balancing between knowing what are the primary challenges in the case of both of these cities. For example, of course, there's the issue of energy failures. There is the connection of energy failures to water supply. There is the topic about evacuation plans related to, for example, industrial leakage or nuclear catastrophes that can be on the side of war, and how to plan around these topics related to mobility, topics related to, let's say, rapid recovery, more than long-term development. So the idea is that the framework of Arthur can be adapted, hopefully, to immediate cases, but also in the longer term, we can also adapt it to longer-term cases, given the availability of data. And this is one of our most important constraints. And this is why I also asked this question to Oleksandr during his presentation. I don't know if Natalia wants to add anything to this question as well.
Yeah, I would like to I take with home a message, thought that in Ukraine, this thought we heard yesterday by Anton Kolomeitsev, today by Oleksandr Golubtsov, and by others, members and architects in Lviv here during our work. There are challenges And now we are dealing with data, and the data are not up to date, so they are partly old and they are not harmonized. But I learned from this symposium that we have to deal with, we have to implement, and then by implementation we find solutions to deal, in this case, with data and to translate this data analysis to the planning and communicating continuously with stakeholders, with city members, with IT specialists and data experts. So this is a main thought that I take with home. Thank you for the question, Agim.
Thank you.
So thank you for the question and the responses. Oleksandr, do you have any thoughts about this presentation that you would like to share?
Так, дякую, Марія, Наталя.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Thank you, Natalia. Thanks a lot for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for this wonderful work. In fact, indeed, this is a very crucial question that you're analyzing, and I can only imagine how complicated it is for you to work with these cities, Kryvyi Rih and Nikopol. And my first question was about data, of course, but it was already asked and commented. So, of course, the question of data for those people who work with specific territories, this question is, well, the primary one to deal with. This is the key thing that we have to get access to in this or the other way, something that we should find and we should think which methods and approaches to use to gain data. And another thing I wanted to point out, the study of such complicated systems as cities requires complex analytical systems. In your presentation and in your article, you provided a very comprehensive analytical scheme that integrates a couple of various approaches and concepts to have the instrument that you are developing. But of course, this is substantiated because we do need to find among all of these results, we need to find our way, and we need to find this set of indicators that will help us tackle the tasks that we have. And in this context, I have a question. You have identified certain thematic categories, and within these categories, you analyze the cities. Of course, under each of the categories, there are indicators that have to be supported with data. Could you give one or two examples of this interconnection when it comes to categories, indicators, and data, and how do you work with this analytic system? Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Yes, as I was mentioning, this is also, as it is an ongoing project and an ongoing research, it is exactly the moment where we are at. But what we have drafted is that from this first slides that Natalia presented about the federated model based on other existing frameworks. From there, we have, let's say, collected what seems to be relevant, specific for a case for Ukraine, based on other frameworks that already have a methodology to measure these indicators, and these are being, let's say, collected and brought up to this unified framework. This is one of the background aspects of the project. More detail about that is one of our other co-authors who is not today with us, unfortunately, but the idea is that there will be definitely, as you're mentioning, deeper analytics happening now that still need to be added to this interface, to this instrument to be provided to the cities. And deeper analytics related to this measure of bringing the indicators to the necessary data and to the GIS analysis include, for example, models related to system dynamics. This is something that we see that are completely necessary for the assessment of cities as these urban complex systems of systems. So we have networks of things that when something is failing, this is one of the examples I can give. We could measure in the cities which ones are having, for example, a surplus of energy depending on the amount of utilities that they have, or if there is a failure in a section of the city, if they are robust enough to hold themselves because of this surplus of energy providers or not. And if not, where should they locate additional energy supply systems? This could be an example of that. And this would be, for example, deeper analytics that we would do with models such as system dynamics models. We feel that the time for this project, the running time for this project will not be enough to go deeper into these type of assessments. And we would hope to then at least reach up to the level of having a, let's say, a proof of concept or a prototype that still would need deeper research to then go into more details for these analytics, no? But at least that we can reach up to the point of supporting cities in identifying their priorities and also identifying what it is that they would need to measure. That would be one of the outcomes of our tour. From there on, then maybe longer research time would be necessary to know exactly how quantifiable can all the aspects inside this framework be. I don't know if this answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. The example with the energy infrastructure was a very vivid one.
Yeah. Okay. I think there were probably other opportunities to develop some questions and discussion on these topics, but we also have to stick to the schedule. I understand it's relatively strict, so we can have an extra 5 minutes or something, but we really shouldn't extend beyond the 4:15 deadline too much. So I would like to give the opportunity now for Agim to give his presentation, and then we'll then follow with some discussions on that. If we have the opportunity, we can return to general questions from the audience, but please bear in mind that I've been given quite strict instructions to keep to time. So Agim, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I will try to stick with maybe even less than 20 minutes, so we have more time to have a conversation on that. The work that I am presenting today is on smart shrinking for Mykolaiv, sustainable development in stagnating and shrinking scenarios. Is a work, as you can see, that is made with other colleagues that unfortunately today couldn't make it, but I will, on behalf of them, thank you all for this opportunity to present this work. Our work is still ongoing, is in the very somehow in the beginning of the process. So different of what you have seen today with the other presentation. This is a more theoretical approach, and we are hoping we have the chance in the future, also after the conversation today, to somehow dig more and try to find some operative level of operative dimension of these ideas that we are producing in this work. We are working in the context of Mykolaiv, that is a K-urban community in the south of Ukraine that holds a central role in the economic, social, and infrastructure fabric of the region and the country. Mykolaiv has conventionally played the role of the region industrial center, where shipbuilding, engineering, IT, and food processing have been the main branches that substantially drive the local economy. However, similar to many cities in Ukraine, Mykolaiv has been deeply influenced by both long-term demographic trends and the devastating impact of the ongoing conflict in Russia. This ongoing demographic, the city has somehow has been somehow characterized by long-term demographic trends. And of course, devastating impact on the ongoing conflict in Russia. Its population in the 2021 was of 476,100 residents, has been steadily declined over 2 decades due to factors such as aging population and low fertility, and including delayed childbirth. The ongoing demographic shrinkage was further impacted by the war, which led to the massive displacement of the population loss. By the end of 2022, about half of all the citizens has managed to flee, reducing the number of residents in around 220,000 residents. Today, I will try to present our work in these four segments or parts. I will try to introduce you where our work is placed inside this collaborative and cooperative collaboration with UNICE, One Works, and UN for Ukraine Cities. And I will also explain you the background where I am working, and we are working with our co-authors of this work. Then we will present you some possible demographic scenarios for the city of Mykolaiv after the war and their socioeconomic effect on the city. Then we will introduce some kind of contradiction, opportunities, cases, strategies, and consequences of the geography of our knowledge produced by the content of smart shrinkage, literature, and experience. And then we will try to understand whether and how these strategies can be applied in the mounting recovery challenge in Mykolaiv. As I mentioned before, this work is inside much more complex and overlapped work that we are producing with a lot of stakeholders or with a lot of actors. And inside the Politecnico di Milano, where I am an assistant professor in urban planning and design, I am part of this extended group that is coordinated by Paola Pucci and Stefano Salata, where we are trying to somehow introduce, help to implement the future master plan of the city of Mykolaiv through proposing and experimenting with analytical, interpretive, and planning tools able of dealing with the condition of uncertainty. For this reason, before I was asking about that, because this is one of our somehow main background where we are placing, we are trying to work. We would like also in this our work to put in discussion established approach for the construction of the master plan. We would like to also have a necessary interaction with the local administration and local stakeholders and community inside Mykolaiv, and discuss and exploit the context and measures in the available plans and programs. We would like to contribute to the construction of short, medium, long-term scenarios for the master plan of Mykolaiv, and trying to deal with uncertainty in the master plan, implying some aspects that are relevant for us. For example, the times and the legacy of the war, the post-war social economic framework, the system of urban planning, programming, and land regime, and the pre- and post-conflict system of governance and spatial government. For the future of Mykolaiv, in the context of war, we have produced three demographic scenarios that can be distinguished in baseline, worst case, and best case scenarios. All this demographic change has huge repercussions in the social economic sphere. Casualties, forced migration, and displacement are exacerbating the pre-existing demographic challenge faced by Mykolaiv. As I mentioned before, the aging population, gender imbalance, and declining of workforce. And this can result in increasing pressure on social services, healthcare, and the public infrastructure, especially in the view of the growth of the older population. Moreover, the war is undermining any economic activity in the city, previously centered around the large and lively industrial base, now disrupted on trade routes and industrial production. However, we think that opportunities for the economic recovery may exist through the rebuilding of infrastructure and restart of industrial activities. This case is further encouraged, especially in our point of view, if the population return and international aid supports reconstruction efforts. The work that I am presenting today, as I mentioned before, present these three demographic scenarios for Mykolaiv after the Russian invasion and explore the contradiction and the opportunity of this process for the urban and regional planning. The most likely scenario, according to the expert, suggests a gradual return of displaced residents, driven by the improving security situation and emotionally ties or family ties with the city. The baseline scenario suggests that the intensification of the war and the increasing sense of safety could drive the return of displaced residents in the short term. This will be driven by slow and gradually revitalization of the economic supply and demand, including business activity and purchasing power. However, long-term population levels are expected to decline as a similar rate observed in the pre-conflict situation, driven, as I mentioned before, by aging population dynamics and decreasing foreign investment. The worst-case scenario assumes a prolonged war and instability, deeply impacting population dynamics, and potential returners in the newcomers weight the risk of settling in the region marked by instability. The worst-case scenario, further instability and war, would crucially undermine any prospect of population recovery, further degrading Mykolaiv's social fabric, discouraging both residents and investors alike. Finally, the best-case scenario suggests the peace treaty in the immediate future, reducing the psychological impact of conflict and encouraging the return of displaced individuals. This economic regeneration might defend against long-term demographic decline due to the resident repatriation and the influx of new settlers in the city. These are consideration optimistic projection, as you can imagine, and given to the geopolitical uncertainty of the current situation, the probability of this outcome is still very low. To different extent, all these three scenarios, in our point of view, have effects, as also who spoke before me underlined, has effect on social and demographic, in economic and public administration level. As concern of society and demography, the gender distribution will be biased toward women. There will be a slow but persistent population reduction and an increasing aging society because of the low birth rate and rising life expectancy. The impact on economy is related to the post-conflict disruption to production facilities, trading routes, and supply chains. Besides, international macroeconomic factor and labor supply are critical to the city's economic revival. On the other hand, favorable microeconomic condition and population expansion can stimulate the labor market by reviving the workforce. Finally, the impact of public administration might concern the availability of essential social services. By contrast, in the case of population growth, optimistic scenarios that I presented to you before, the government may have more money to spend on reconstruction, providing public infrastructure and a well-defined modernization plan. But we think also that these aspects somehow are really related to a discourse, a debate on somehow a field of study that has been developed in the last year about urban shrinkage. And of course, the context of Mykolaiv can be inserted inside one of the contexts that has been facing urban shrinkage in the past year. In this case, we are somehow trying to question ourselves and trying to develop a conversation with also the stakeholders to understand how how local urban development policies has to somehow address the topic of urban shrinkage, not only with this vision of urban growth and expansion, but with an adaptation of spatial planning experience that somehow actively pursue control and smart shrinking policies, where we think that maybe topics as smart decline or smart shrinkage or degrowth somehow can introduce a more sustainable development model without growth inside the context of Mykolaiv. If we think, for example, that Mykolaiv, as in 2022 Russian invasion, is still going, and looking to the possibility population scenarios, identify the demographic scenarios that Mykolaiv master plan produced by us and I presented you today. The issue considering controlled shrinking strategies has become increasingly urgent in our point of view. If we do not consider the best case scenarios of the fast end of the conflict and the project of the population return to almost pre-conflict levels, but we consider the worst case or the baseline scenarios, we will identify stagnating and shrinking demographic condition through and planning somehow, and planning and adapting to this stagnating and declining must be a priority to reduce disparities and plan, as I mentioned before, a more sustainable development for the city of Mykolaiv. So we think that control and smart shrinkage issue have forcefully entered the disciplinary debate and of urban and regional studies, and we can already witness to numerous plan, project, and policy that are going to this direction. And we think also that there is also some cases that we would like in the future to study to understand if we can adapt to the Mykolaiv situation some tools or some strategies that we have seen in other contexts. I think we think that planning and adjusting to the stagnation and declining must be a top priority if we ignore the best case scenario, but instead considering the worst case and the baseline scenarios where we identify stagnating and shrinking demographic condition. Specifically in the light of urban shrinking, it's possible to view the decline of population consumption and needs in the case, as in the case of Mykolaiv, as a clear social advantage in the future. Besides, further research should be focused on exploring whether and how Mykolaiv can become an example of how the growth and shrinking technique might propel operational related and controlled shrinking and network compactness inside the city. We are, of course, aware that this is, of course, a very delicate and very ambiguous position to somehow think about the growth in post-disaster, post-conflict situation. But we also are aware that this, as the future and as we have presented today with these three scenarios, that likely the scenarios that will be presented are the worst case or baseline scenarios. We think that a plan and the plan for the future of the city should somehow address this topic and should somehow introduce this topic inside the plan without murmuring attitude, so without a pessimist attitude, but working with this approach and working with this idea of the growth and smart shrinking to implement and to improve the quality of life, the environment, and also the future somehow development of the country without the growth that we are expected or we wish the city can provide. As I promised, I try to stay very short. So these are some reference of the reference that I have introduced in the presentation. But in the paper you will see other reference that I didn't have time to present today. And if you agree, I can close here my presentation. I'm very happy to reply or to comment with you on our ongoing research. Thank you so much.
And thank you also for your presentation. Right, we have some time for some comments from our two presenters. Can I give first of all the opportunity to Oleksandr to give his thoughts on this?
Thank you
very much, Mr. Kercuku. Thank you to you and your colleagues for this brilliant work. This presentation gives a very unconventional but very honest point of view upon the development of Ukrainian cities. We understand that in connection with the war and other social and economic problems, cities of Ukraine can be facing the permanent shrinking processes, including the shrinking of their population. So the approaches which you are developing in your work are absolutely right in terms of up-to-date Ukrainian experience within the Ukrainian context. And I would like to mention that all the planning documents I have seen till now are discussing cities of Ukraine as growing. So all those planning documents are designating specific territories for new infrastructure, for new development, always. So all they are about expansion and never they are about shrinking. So I'm absolutely impressed by your work, which is rather realistic. And talking about the questions, one scenario which you presented, the optimistic scenario, is connected to the safety aspect. What do you mean under the end of the hostilities? Why I am asking this question? You know, talking about the end of the hostilities is not a safety scenario, in my opinion, because still there is a lot of uncertainty about the conflict being resumed. So have you considered a scenario in which really Ukraine gets foolproof security guarantees, let's say, provided by NATO or other organizations, and it would be not a pause in the hostilities, but the end of the hostilities? What is your opinion, please?
Thank you so much for your question and the comment. Yes, when we started to think about this paper and this work that we are producing, we were aware about the somehow the very delicate position to talk maybe with the audience as you or with the local community about reconstruction through smart shrinking. It somehow looks a contradiction. So it's somehow a very strange position. And believe us, it's not a very safe position, if we have to say, because of course people are expecting growth, they are expecting the development through growth. But we believe and we think that this idea of planning shrinking and planning for the future of the reconstruction of Mykolaiv or other contexts in Ukraine, taking consideration that the demographic trends that is happening all over the Eastern Europe, it's nothing that the end of the war will stop. So it's a matter of fact. So we believe that in the discussion should be very important to address this topic of how we deal with demographic shrinking. Concerning your question, maybe I was the best case scenario is what you have mentioned before. When we think that the best case scenario is a prolonged, safe context where, for example, the UN or Ukraine is part of European Union. We had this kind of Delphi survey where we built these three scenarios, and with experts and local stakeholders, we underline this best case scenario as this scenario where Ukraine is part of European Union and part of a system of protection that somehow stops and mitigate this dimension of uncertainty of the war. But at the same time, we also believe that that the dimension of safety it's something that will arrive at a long time. So this base case scenario is also a long-term scenario. It's not only a short-term scenario where this dimension of safety of the population and how they will manage to inhabit in the context is somehow a long-term scenario. I maybe address this topic very shortly in my speech for the matter of time, but in the paper we have somehow underlined this our approach on these scenarios, not only as this kind of worst and best line scenarios, but also for us it's very important to address also this dimension of short term, medium term, and long term. So how these three timeline somehow interact with these three scenarios. And in the paper, and we are also trying now to address more specifically this aspect, but these are very clear in our vision and in our work. But thank you for your question, and I hope I did reply to your concern and your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We also have the opportunity to have some questions and comments from Maria and Natalia, who would like to take the floor first. Maria?
To comment something. So I'm very impressed by the methodology you used, Agim, with the scenarios, because in the epidemiology, where I am coming from, we use similar methods to predict risk, for example, for cardiovascular diseases. When a patient comes to a hospital with a number of risk factors and should be curated, with other words, recovered, we can predict his risk based on the number of his risk factors for short or long term by building scores. My question to you is, how do you differentiate between scenarios? Let's say, how do you categorize the components? For example, population, numbers, administrative conditions, and so forth, to put them in the optimistic, basic, or pessimistic scenario. Because I think it is a very good base to think about risk prediction in the cities of Ukraine, which have different situations now because of the war. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. Unfortunately, the person that has worked on this kind of data set of indicators and data set of information are not present today, but I will try to reply with what I have learned from them and working with them. That we somehow, as you have made in your work, we have created this data set of different indicators where, for example, the demographic aspect, the social, economic aspect, the administrative and governative aspect are listed and somehow are part of this matrix. And for each of this kind of parameters and this kind of index, we have produced a Delphi survey and some kind of projection for the future, where we have asked to the local community and expert that somehow knows what this person, what probability and what kind of probability this data and this information somehow can have in the context. And of course, for a matter of time, I couldn't have time to present, and of course of competence, because in this case the other two colleagues will present this work. But in the same time, for a matter of time, we didn't present this data set, but we are working to implement this data set. And this data set is somehow a very, for us, rich archives of information. But as you have also mentioned before, this level of uncertainty and not very clear lack of data also is a matter somehow reduce this precise dimension of this data set. But in the same times, as you have mentioned before, using open data and using the data that are provided by survey made by the municipality and by the local NPO, we have provided this basic data where we have created these scenarios with demographic scenarios, and then we have stressed these demographic scenarios with expert and with local stakeholders to understand if this has somehow reality. And then we have created these three different scenarios. I hope I replied to your question.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Can I ask Maria if she has any comments or questions to briefly to
yes.
ask?
Thank you, Dominic. I actually have two questions. I'll just throw them in there, Agim, and then if you don't have the time to answer, it's okay. But just I wanted to share with you because I find it fascinating. We have dealt with these topics as well in our work. My first question is, if you find that this methodology for scenario drafting is actually something that one could replicate into more cities, because the way we have understood right now the issue in Ukraine is that basically this shrinking problem is happening in most of eastern cities of Ukraine, of course, because of the geolocation of the front line, and how in reverse they are, let's say, adding additional stress to the western cities. So there's this shift of population. There's also the challenge of how to plan for cities when the economy maybe doesn't have the working population to just, you know, put the system to work again. So how do you plan for these things? That was my first question. If it's something replicable. The other question was more related to I saw in your slides that you have the plan of the scenario planning was thinking this best, middle, and worst scenario to 2035. But sometimes I feel that the example of other shrinking cities, like in the American context, maybe sometimes cities don't shrink because of war. They shrink by other means, for example, aging population, lack of industry that moves somewhere else. In the case of Ukraine, this high factor of uncertainty that you mentioned as well, and we are dealing with as well, is something that we cannot really give a solid prognosis if people would maybe return to their cities faster in a very positive scenario. How does planning maybe can work in a more agile way to even prepare that actually shrinking stops faster than we think and cities start growing again, and then we have to actually give the opportunity for planning to have a more agile approach to let's say re-steer the future years of these cities in another direction. So it's for us, it's a challenge knowing this, let's say, scenario planning and in how long we can think of, given this topic of uncertainty. But I think shrinkage due to war is different than shrinkage due to other situations of society and urban systems, no? These were my two topics.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me also to underline this, because maybe in the presentation it was very fast, but one of the slides has also mentioned this aspect that you, Maria, was mentioning, like shrinking is happening for demographic reason, for economic reason, for war, or for some kind of natural disaster. So there are a lot of different aspects, and of course, in this case, in Ukraine and Mykolaiv, in the case that we have studied, there is an overlapping of three of this kind of process. That is the economic shrinking, the demographic shrinking, due to the long-term shrinking that is happening in the region because before the war, there was still ongoing shrinking process going on in the context in the region, but also, of course, now the war. We thought that the most plausible somehow vision for the future, it was 2035, because if we somehow extend this scenario for longer, it is more difficult to somehow manage to understand the reality of this kind of scenarios that we have produced. So this kind of middle long scenario that we think could help to somehow address the next somehow policies and design proposal, we think is more clear, and it's more easy also for local municipality to understand that this time is not so long, but it's not tomorrow. So for this reason, we have decided this 2035. But of course, this kind of work can be made and can be somehow adapted to a more long time process. And of course, your question also allowed me to underline also another aspect that I think is very important, is the fact that we don't know if this process can be applied to other contexts, and we are very happy to collaborate with all of you. I think what was interesting in the conversation today is that all the three presentations somehow overlap on some aspect and can collaborate with each other and implement. And I think you used a very beautiful word before, theory of knowledge. So you creating and producing this toolbox, a theory of knowledge for to give to the municipality or to give to the context, I think it's very important. And maybe our approach on this shrinking process and our approach on this kind of shrinking vision, and with these three scenarios, can also be implemented and can somehow work in parallel with some of your proposal and some of your situation. So I think yes. And in the same time, to conclude very fast, I think that what we are trying to do now, because as your work we are ongoing, so it's still in the beginning phase of this work. Now we are trying to really try to reply to the question that you are making me today. So how to overlap these scenarios and this shrinking vision, smart shrinking vision, to the policy and to the solution, because of course we have to think about the policy that we are introducing, and I think for this reason smart shrinking process helps in a more adaptive way, as you have also presented in your work. So in a way that we can go back, if we plan and we don't plan an infrastructure or system or capital, infrastructure, social or physical capital that is somehow very vast and very planned for a growing society. If we do that, we have to make that possible to reverse that, because of course that will be a problem if the population is not growing. But in the same time, when I think about adaptive planning through smart shrinking, I have in mind the fact that of course you are planning for maybe a total population amount, but then if this plan should be able to be adapted if the population grows. So of course this taking consideration that the plan should somehow be able to adapt on the context that has changed and can change in the future. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have to cut even Dominic across because we are running out of time, and we need to have a break here, and we also have densified the program from the other end. So I'm really sorry we couldn't finish it properly here, but we are very thankful for your presentations, and also you, for Dominic, for moderating this. And we are now having a break of 15 minutes, and we will be back basically in 15 minutes on Zoom. And I would like for our next speakers, please shorten your presentations to 15 minutes maximum, and I will count it in, because we also have a contribution from Hanna Bonder at the end of our discussion to conclude our symposium this day. And move on from that point basically, but for now this is it. Thank you again, and see you soon, at least via emails. But bye.
Thank you very much.